I'm Priscilla Barrera with the Investing News Network, and here with me today is Vivas Kumar, Principal Consultant, Supply Chain at Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. Vivas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're here in Vancouver at the Benchmark World Tour stop number 7, I believe. To start, can you let us know how you're finding investor sentiment towards battery metals so far around North America, and which raw material would you say it's the most popular right now?
Absolutely. Investor sentiment and investor knowledge around battery materials has been steadily growing over the last few years. 2 years ago, the message that we were delivering at these conferences was the fact that there was significant underinvestment because of the fact that there was a lack of knowledge in this space. Now, sophisticated investors are starting to get educated in the space, and now they're more actively looking for opportunities where to invest. So the trend is going in the right direction.
All right, and you've recently joined Benchmark as a consultant, but we know that you worked at Tesla before, and since it's the first time we're speaking, can you talk a little bit about your experience there?
Absolutely. I had an amazing time at Tesla, very proud Model 3 owner. When I was at Tesla, I was responsible for battery raw materials sourcing, and I had worked quite a bit with the Benchmark team, even in my role at Tesla. And when Simon approached me with the opportunity to join his team and help build up the capability of the value chain as a whole, based on experiences learned through on-the-ground procurement work, I thought it was an opportunity I couldn't refuse.
Great, that's great. And in your expert opinion, what would you say is the current biggest misunderstanding about the electric vehicle supply chain?
There's a large difference between the way in which commodities work and specialty chemicals work. And the materials that are needed for battery manufacturing are closer to specialty chemicals than they are commodities. That means that greater investment needs to be made, specifications will be tighter, the knowledge needed to produce these materials is much more specialized, and the customers need to be involved in shaping the decision making around the flow sheets from the very beginning, which is the reason why I chose to focus my entire speech for the World Tour on qualification, which hits on the crux of this issue that the specialty chemicals are very hard to produce, and the qualification process to get to using these materials in the supply chain is quite complicated.
Okay, and in your presentation, you talked about this qualification process, as you just mentioned, the battery companies and automakers go through for the different raw materials. What would you say are some key factors that investors should consider about this process?
The first is that qualification is widely differentiated between the battery players. There's no one-size-fits-all process. The second is that as you go towards higher tiers of manufacture, and the way that we define tiers is when it comes to quality, people who create more high-quality batteries, more high-quality vehicles, they're oftentimes going to have much more difficult and strenuous qualification processes. And the third is that the qualification process is something that is constantly changing based on changing regulations, first and foremost, but also based on the changing needs of a vehicle manufacturer and of a battery company, shaped by the feedback that they're getting from their customers towards what types of products that they would like to make. Ultimately, the quality of raw materials flows through to the quality of the vehicle and affects the brand perception of an automotive manufacturer. And so, as legacy automotive companies shift towards having large portfolios of EV products and try to differentiate those different products within different brand segments, they're going to have different needs for how the materials that go into batteries need to perform. And as a result, the qualification processes will also be changing over time.
All right, and I know that you mentioned the different tiers that you talked about on Benchmark. Do you want to expand a little bit more about that and whether this qualification process is easier for some tiers or not? I know that you just mentioned that it is a bit different, so do you want to expand on that?
When we at Benchmark think of a tier 1 battery company, we're, as of today, talking about people like Panasonic and Tesla, LG Chem, Samsung SDI. These are companies that have produced batteries for decades and have produced batteries for vehicles that have extended ranges that compete with internal combustion engine. Tier 2 and Tier 3 players are players that have either generally produced batteries for non-vehicle and non-energy storage applications, so mostly consumer electronics, or some of the newer companies that have emerged in this space. there is a very good likelihood that those who are in the lower tiers will be able to jump up into tier 1 as long as they prove a consistent track record of producing high quality batteries that are consumed by major automotive companies for mass market applications over time.
All right. And looking ahead, would you say, is there anything that could be done to streamline this process, make it faster, more efficient, or we will continue to see the same timeline as we enter the key 2020 decade?
As we get to the point where automakers are starting to try to hit ambitious goals for electric vehicles, their needs and their demand for battery materials is going to be basically insatiable. They're going to need to have more suppliers on deck with whom they could work for these materials in order to meet their goals. As a result, they're going to need to qualify more players. It is in the best interest of an automaker or a battery maker to have a qualification process that's efficient, that is robust but easily communicated, and still maintains a high level of quality. So you are seeing a push now of automakers wanting to get involved in qualification when 2 years ago they wouldn't have even asked about it, and for automakers pushing battery producers to fasten or to make their qualification processes faster. That said, much of the burden of qualification in the beginning still falls on the material provider, because effectively, just to be blunt, they're trying to prove to their end customer that they can produce a product consistently and reliably at a high level of quality over and over and over again to be used in the long run. And that characteristic will not change, that the earlier part of the process is going to be mostly focused on the performance of the material provider.
All right, and my last question for you today, what would you say are some of the key factors investors should be paying attention to this year in the battery metal space, and maybe in particular as we enter the next decade in terms of the EV supply chain?
One key to seeing how mature the supply chain is whether or not we see more announcements of automotive OEMs being directive and actually signing direct offtake contracts for battery materials like lithium, nickel, and cobalt in the space. We've seen several headlines recently. So, for example, this year we saw that Volkswagen announced a partnership with Ganfeng Lithium out of China. We saw that BMW is discussing nickel from Mern in Australia. So we're clearly seeing signs of action from automakers. And the more and more of these supply contracts that we see, my opinion is that that indicates a more mature supply chain and a more efficient supply chain into which sophisticated investors can put their capital into.
All right, Vivas, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.